The manager fired a waitress for serving a hungry homeless boy instead of wealthy businessmen. Days later, everyone was stunned by what happened next. The bustle of the Taste restaurant grew as evening turned into night. The soft background music and dim lighting created an elegant and sophisticated atmosphere, the kind of place only the wealthy and demanding could afford. Alicia, with her hair neatly tied up in a flawless bun and her uniform perfectly pressed, moved gracefully between tables, balancing trays filled with exquisite dishes and expensive wines. She had been working at Taste for nearly a year, and while she had mastered her duties in this luxurious environment, she never fully adjusted to the coldness that permeated the place. Her colleagues, like Kate, seemed to have left behind any trace of humanity, becoming automatons who served with mechanical precision, always fearful of the wrath of Mr. Smith, the restaurant's owner. Mr. Smith was a middle-aged man with a fiery temper. His dark eyes and stern expression rarely showed any signs of sympathy. To him, Taste was not just a restaurant, it was a symbol of perfection, and any mistake, no matter how small, was unforgivable. Alicia had seen several of her colleagues publicly reprimanded for minor slip-ups, and she knew she couldn't afford a single error. That night, the restaurant was packed. One table in particular, occupied by a group of businessmen, demanded most of her attention. They were regulars, known for their impatience and generous tips, as long as the service was flawless. Alicia maintained her professional smile as she ensured everything was in perfect order. But something caught her eye. At the entrance of the restaurant, an 8-year-old boy with dirty and worn-out clothes was staring inside with a mix of awe and desperation. His dark hair was tangled, and his large eyes reflected the hunger he felt. Alicia felt a pang in her heart, seeing the boy's thin figure, which seemed so out of place amidst such luxury. The boy timidly stepped into a corner, trying not to draw attention. He sat at an empty table, waiting for what? Alicia wasn't sure, but she couldn't look away. Something in his expression reminded her of herself as a child, lost and alone after the tragic fire that took her parents. Alicia knew she couldn't afford to be distracted from her work. The businessmen at the main table were already showing signs of impatience, and Kate was watching her from across the room, ready to point out any mistake. But despite the rules, despite the consequences she knew she'd face, Alicia couldn't just ignore the boy. As her colleagues attended to the customers with the precision of a Swiss watch, Alicia made a decision that could cost her dearly. She headed to the kitchen, where Chef Ramiro was preparing a banana cake, one of the most popular desserts on the menu. She waited patiently for it to be ready, feeling the anxiety build in her chest. She knew what she was about to do might mean the end of her job, but she couldn't regret it. With the cake in hand, Alicia returned to the dining area. Her heart pounded as she approached the boy. When she reached the table, she offered the plate with a warm smile. The boy looked at her in surprise and disbelief, as if he couldn't fathom that someone was offering him something so delicious. "Here you go, little one," Alicia whispered, trying not to attract attention. The boy, after a moment of hesitation, took the cake with trembling hands and began to devour it with silent gratitude. Alicia stood by the table for a moment, feeling a strange mix of relief and fear. She knew she was being watched, and indeed she was. Kate, who never missed a chance to monitor her rival, saw the entire scene from a distance. Her lips curled into a cold, calculating smile. To her, this was a golden opportunity. She could use this act of compassion against Alicia, presenting her to Mr. Smith as a waitress who couldn't maintain professionalism in such a demanding environment. Meanwhile, at the main table, the businessmen began murmuring among themselves, irritated by the delay in service. One of them, visibly annoyed, made a sarcastic comment about how long they had been waiting. Alicia, though she heard it, decided to remain calm. She bent down to the boy and gently brushed his hair before stepping away. "Enjoy the cake," she whispered, before hurrying over to the businessmen's table. The atmosphere in the restaurant started to grow tense. Alicia felt the pressure mounting on her shoulders, but she couldn't regret what she had done. As she took the orders from the impatient customers, memories of her grandfather, Don Alfred, filled her with a mix of pain and strength. He had always taught her to be compassionate, to never lose her humanity, even in the toughest moments. But she knew there would be consequences. What she had done, though noble, could be seen as a lapse in duty. As she finished taking orders, she felt Kate's gaze on her like an unbearable weight. She knew her action wouldn't go unpunished. The day was nearing its end, but for Alicia, something was just beginning. Although she didn't know what would happen next, she felt deep within her that her life was about to change dramatically. Alicia's heart raced as she hurried to serve the businessmen at the main table. She had made a mistake, and she knew it. Despite her grandfather's teachings and her desire to do the right thing, she couldn't ignore the growing fear inside her. She knew that at Taste, any deviation from perfection was met with a high price, and this time would be no different. As she attended to the customers, she felt Kate's critical gaze on her, like a predator stalking its prey. Kate, always ready to seize any opportunity to discredit her, wasn't going to let what she had just witnessed slide. Alicia finished taking the orders with a forced smile, struggling to keep her composure, but deep down she knew a storm was about to break. The murmurs in the restaurant began to increase. Kate wasted no time and approached one of their colleagues, whispering in his ear what had happened. Within minutes, the news that Alicia had served a homeless boy instead of the important businessman reached Mr. Smith's ears. Mr. Smith, who had been overseeing the service from his office, descended to the dining area with firm steps, his expression a mix of contained fury and disapproval. The usual bustle of the restaurant almost completely ceased as employees and customers noticed his presence. There was a tension in the air that could be cut with a knife. Alicia felt a chill run down her spine when she saw him approaching. She tried to focus on her work, but her mind was filled with chaotic thoughts. She remembered the times her grandfather, Don Alfred, had told her that true courage was standing firm in the face of adversity. But now, facing the imminent confrontation, she wondered if she was truly capable of enduring what was about to come. "Alicia," Mr. Smith's voice echoed through the restaurant, cutting through the silence like thunder. All eyes turned to her. Alicia set the tray down on the table and with a mix of fear and determination, walked toward her boss. Mr. Smith watched her with his dark eyes, full of disapproval. Kate, standing in the back, had a look of contained satisfaction, sure that she had finally achieved her goal. "What do you think you're doing?" Mr. Smith asked with a calmness that was even more terrifying than a shout. Alicia tried to explain, to justify her actions, but the words seemed to stick in her throat. Finally, taking a deep breath, she spoke. "I saw a hungry child, Mr. Smith. I couldn't just ignore him." Mr. Smith's face hardened even more, if that was possible. His gaze turned icy, and his lips pressed into a thin line. "This is a high-end restaurant, not a charity soup kitchen," he said, his voice cold and sharp. "Your actions have shown a lack of judgment and professionalism that we cannot tolerate here. Important customers were neglected because you chose to prioritize someone who shouldn't even have been in this place." Alicia felt the ground open up beneath her feet. She knew she had taken a big risk, but hearing those words hit her with unexpected force. "I'm sorry, Mr. Smith, I just wanted to help," she tried to explain, but was abruptly cut off. "I don't want to hear excuses," Smith roared, losing his patience. "You've jeopardized the reputation of this establishment, and that's unacceptable. I can't allow someone like you to continue working here. You're fired. Hand over your apron and leave this restaurant immediately." The announcement fell on Alicia like a hammer. The murmurs in the restaurant intensified, and some of the waitresses looked at her with pity, while others, like Kate, maintained an expression of indifference or satisfaction. Alicia felt the air grow heavy, difficult to breathe. With trembling hands, she unfastened her apron and handed it over. With a broken heart and an emptiness in her chest, she turned and began walking toward the exit. Every step felt like an eternity. She passed by the place where the boy had been sitting, but the table was now empty. Thomas was gone, and with him, the small spark of hope that had briefly lit up the darkness now engulfing Alicia. As she crossed the restaurant's threshold, the cold night air hit her face. Outside, under the flickering streetlight, she stopped and looked back at the place that had been her life for the past year. The bright lights and elegant music inside contrasted with the darkness and silence of the street. Feeling completely alone, Alicia slowly walked away, directionless. her mind filled with doubts and fears. As she walked, her grandfather's words echoed in her mind. Doing the right thing is sometimes hard, but it's always worth it. Yet, at that moment, she wondered if it had really been worth helping Thomas. With each step, the despair within her grew, and the uncertainty about what would come next enveloped her like a storm just beginning. The cold night air whipped Alicia's face as she wandered aimlessly through the deserted city streets. Her footsteps echoed on the pavement, and the distance from the restaurant, Taste, seemed to stretch endlessly with each step. The darkness around her felt heavy, oppressive, as if the entire world had turned against her in a single instant. The weight of what had happened in the restaurant settled on her shoulders, making her feel small and insignificant. She had lost her job, her only source of income, and with it, the little stability she had managed to build after years of struggle. As her thoughts spiraled, the tears she had held back began to roll down her cheeks. Alicia remembered the first time she had stepped into Taste. It had been a golden opportunity, a chance to leave behind the painful memories of her childhood and start anew in the big city. Her grandfather, Don Alfred, had raised her with love and discipline, teaching her the value of hard work and the importance of staying true to her principles. But now, as she walked alone through the streets, she wondered if those principles truly had a place in such a cold, unrelenting world. Images from her past began to flood her mind, especially that fateful night when she lost everything. She was only 6 years old when the fire destroyed her home and took her parents away. The smell of smoke, the searing heat, and her mother's desperate screams as she tried to reach her replayed in her memory like a recurring nightmare. Little Alicia had been rescued by the firefighters, but the emotional scar had never fully healed. After the fire, it was Don Alfred who took her in. Though the pain of losing her parents never went away, her grandfather became her rock, the pillar that supported her through the toughest moments. He taught her everything he knew about life, especially about cooking, his great passion. He instilled in her the belief that food was not just sustenance, but a way to show love and care for others. Those warm, loving memories contrasted cruelly with the cold reality Alicia now faced. She wandered aimlessly for hours, trying to find a solution to her situation, but answers seemed to elude her. She tried looking for work elsewhere, knocking on doors at small cafes and restaurants, but the responses were always the same. "We're not hiring," or "Sorry, we need someone with more experience." Desperation grew within her with each rejection. Days passed, and Alicia began to feel the darkness of her situation completely envelop her. The city, which had once been a place of promises and opportunities, now seemed hostile and filled with dangers. The streets she once walked with hope now felt cold and empty. The loss of a job and the humiliation of her dismissal had left her vulnerable, and each day that passed without a solution increased her anguish. The memories of the fire continued to haunt her, especially on lonely nights. She would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, with the sensation that the fire was surrounding her again. She tried to hold on to her grandfather's teachings, but the weight of reality was overwhelming. How could she continue to believe in kindness and compassion when the world seemed to punish her for it? On one of those dark days, while walking through a deserted park, Alicia saw a group of children playing happily. Their laughter and shouts filled the air, and for a moment, the sound transported her back to her childhood, to those happy days before everything changed. She felt a lump in her throat as she watched the children, remembering how she used to play in her backyard, with her mother watching from the window and her father preparing a barbecue in the garden. The sight of those children made her stop. She sat on a nearby bench, watching them with tears in her eyes. She thought of Thomas, the boy she had tried to help in the restaurant. Where would he be now? Would he still be wandering the streets, hungry and homeless? Alicia blamed herself for not being able to do more for him, for not finding a way to protect him. But she also knew that if she had ignored his suffering, she would never have forgiven herself. Don Alfred's words echoed in her mind once more. Doing the right thing is sometimes hard, but it's always worth it. But now, sitting on that bench, with the cold wind biting at her face and despair in her heart, Alicia wondered if it had really been worth it. She had done what she believed was right, had followed her principles, and yet she was alone, jobless, and facing an uncertain future. As the shadows of the night began to envelop the park, Alicia slowly got up and started walking again. She knew she couldn't stay there, but she also didn't know where to go. The city, once her refuge, now seemed like a maze she couldn't escape from. But despite the darkness, there was a small flame inside her that refused to go out. Something deep within told her this wasn't the end, that there was something more waiting for her, though she couldn't imagine what it might be. With that small spark of hope, Alicia kept moving forward, unaware that destiny had more surprises in store. Unexpected twists that would change her life in ways she could never have foreseen. The days of despair continued for Alicia. Every morning she woke up with a hollow feeling in her stomach, knowing she had no place to go, no job waiting for her. The nights were the worst, filled with painful memories and nightmares of the fire that had marked her life. But somewhere deep inside, that small spark of hope remained, refusing to be completely extinguished. One afternoon, after another failed attempt to find work, Alicia decided to take an aimless walk through the city. The sunlight was beginning to fade, and the shadows of the buildings lengthened as the city prepared for the night. Not knowing where to go, her steps led her to a park she used to frequent when she needed to think. It was a quiet place, with tall trees that whispered softly to the wind and benches where people sat to contemplate life. Alicia sat on one of those benches, watching the few people passing through the park. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to find some peace in the midst of the internal storm consuming her. But suddenly a memory surfaced in her mind, a summer day in her adolescence when she used to come to this same park with someone very special. She opened her eyes abruptly, surprised by the intensity of the memory. Charles. She hadn't thought of him in years. They had been inseparable friends during their teenage years, and her first love. However, life had taken them in different directions, and after the tragedy that struck her family, Alicia had lost all contact with him. As her thoughts revolved around Charles, a feeling of nostalgia overwhelmed her. She wondered what had become of him, if he had managed to achieve his dreams. Sometimes, in her darkest days, Alicia wondered if he also remembered her, if he had ever thought of her with the same fondness she now recalled him. Lost in her thoughts, Alicia didn't notice the figure approaching along the path. It was only when she heard her name, spoken by a voice that seemed strangely familiar, that she looked up. At first, she couldn't believe what she was seeing. There, standing before her, was Charles, the same Charles who had filled so many of her happy memories. Charles, a few years older but with the same warm smile, looked at her with surprise and joy. For a moment both were silent, caught between the past and the present. Alicia stood up, still unable to believe what she was seeing. "Alicia, is that really you?" Charles asked, breaking the silence. Alicia nodded slowly, feeling the words stick in her throat. There were so many mixed emotions inside her that she didn't know where to begin. Finally, she managed to smile, though her eyes filled with tears. "Charles, I can't believe it's you," she whispered. Charles stepped closer and without hesitation hugged her. It was a hug filled with years of separation, unanswered questions, and a love that, despite time, was still alive. Alicia clung to him, feeling how the sadness and fear that had accumulated over the past weeks began to fade, at least for a moment. After a while, they pulled apart, and Charles looked at her with concern. "What happened to you, Alicia?" he asked gently, noticing the sadness in her eyes. Alicia, still struggling to hold back tears, told him everything. She spoke of her job at Taste, how she had tried to stay true to the values her grandfather had taught her, and how everything had crumbled when she decided to help a homeless child. She explained how she had lost her job, her dignity, and how she had been wandering aimlessly ever since. Charles listened in silence, his expression shifting from surprise to sadness, and finally to determination. When she finished speaking, Alicia felt as though a weight had been lifted from her chest, but at the same time the reality of her situation was still overwhelming. "I don't know what to do, Charles," she said finally, lowering her gaze. "I've lost everything I had, and I don't know how to move forward." Charles took her hand, squeezing it gently. "Alicia, you're not alone," he said firmly. "We'll find a solution together, like we always did. You don't have to carry all of this on your own." Alicia looked at him with gratitude, but also with disbelief. "Why would you do this for me after all this time, Marcia?" she asked. her eyes full of questions and doubts. Charles smiled, but this time his smile was tinged with seriousness. "Because you've always mattered to me, Alicia. And besides," he paused as if what he was about to say was difficult, "there's something else I need to tell you." Alicia watched him, intrigued and a little worried. Charles took a deep breath before continuing. "The boy you helped at the restaurant, Thomas, he's my son." Charles's words hit Alicia like a jolt of electricity. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Thomas, the boy she had risked her job to help, was Charles's son. Seeing the confusion on her face, Charles began to explain. He told her how he had discovered he had a son after his wife's death, and how he had searched desperately for Thomas after learning of his existence. The boy had ended up in an orphanage due to the difficult circumstances of his biological mother, and Charles had come to the city to get him out and give him the life he deserved. Alicia, her heart pounding, felt that fate had played a strange and powerful role in all of this. The boy she had helped, without knowing who he was, turned out to be the son of her first love. It was as if the universe had conspired to bring their paths together again, at the exact moment when they needed each other the most. "I can't believe it," Alicia whispered, still processing the news. Charles nodded. "Neither can I, but what I do know is that it wasn't a coincidence that you helped him. Maybe this is a sign that our lives are still connected in some way." Alicia, moved by Charles's words and by the strange twist of fate, felt something inside her begin to heal. The pain, the despair, and the loneliness that had accompanied her for weeks started to fade, replaced by a sense of hope. Seeing that Alicia was processing everything that had happened, Charles offered her a warm smile. "Alicia, I want to help you, both you and Thomas. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I don't want to miss this chance to fix what we once left behind. We'll get through this together." With tears in her eyes, Alicia felt that, for the first time in a long time, she wasn't alone. Though the road ahead was still uncertain, with Charles by her side, she felt capable of facing it. Reuniting with him, and the revelation that Thomas was his son, had given her a new reason to keep going, to fight for a better future. And so, as the sun set on the horizon, Alicia and Charles, united by fate and their mutual desire to rebuild their lives, began to walk together toward a future full of possibilities. Night had completely fallen, but Alicia and Charles continued walking together, engrossed in a conversation that made them forget the passage of time. After so long apart, it seemed that fate had brought them together at the exact moment they needed each other most. The revelation that Thomas was Charles's son had left Alicia stunned, but also filled with a strange sense of relief, as if everything that had happened in the past weeks had a purpose. They stopped at a small cafe that was still open, and Charles ordered 2 cups of hot coffee. While they waited, Alicia watched Charles closely, noticing the changes time had left on him. Although he was still the same boy she had known in her youth, there was something in his gaze, a mixture of maturity and pain, that hadn't been there before. It was clear that life had also been hard on him. Once they had their coffees, they sat at a table by the window. The street was quiet, and the cozy atmosphere of the cafe offered them a respite from the turmoil they had both been feeling. Charles was the first to speak, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "After my wife's death, my life fell apart," Charles began, staring at his cup. "That's when I discovered I had a son, Thomas, whom I never knew about. My wife had hidden his existence for reasons I never fully understood, and when I finally found out, it was too late." Alicia listened in silence, feeling a lump in her throat. She couldn't imagine what Charles had gone through, but his pain was palpable. "Thomas had been placed in an orphanage," Charles continued, his voice breaking slightly. "When I found out, I promised myself I would find him and get him out of there, that I would do everything possible to give him the life he deserved. I can't change the past, but I want to make amends for what I can." Alicia nodded, her heart pounding with the mix of emotions washing over her. She remembered the moment she saw Thomas in the restaurant, his fragile and desperate appearance. She had felt an instant connection with him, not knowing she was helping the son of the man who had once meant so much to her. "When I saw him in the restaurant, I knew I couldn't ignore him," Alicia said softly. "There was something in his eyes, something that reminded me of myself when I was a child. I felt like I had to do something even though I didn't know what. Charles looked at her with gratitude and admiration. What you did for him and for me. I can't express how grateful I am, Alicia. It's no coincidence that you helped him. I think in some way we were meant to find each other again. Alicia lowered her gaze, feeling the weight of her own emotions. She had lost so much in the past few weeks, but now, with Charles and Thomas back in her life, she felt that maybe, just maybe, there was a reason behind it all. "Charles, I don't know what's going to happen now," she said finally, lifting her eyes to meet his. "My life has been a mess since I lost my job, and I still don't know how I'm going to move forward. But knowing that Thomas is safe with you gives me a little peace." Charles nodded, understanding the pain and uncertainty Alicia was going through. "Alicia, you don't have to go through this alone," he said firmly. "I want to help you, not just because I owe you so much for what you did for Thomas, but because you've always been important to me. Maybe we've been apart for years, but that doesn't mean our paths can't cross again." Alicia felt a mix of gratitude and hope as she heard those words. Although the road ahead was still uncertain, having Charles by her side gave her a sense of security she hadn't experienced in a long time. "Thank you, Charles," she said sincerely. "I don't know what I would have done without you, without knowing that I'm not completely alone in this." Charles smiled, and for a moment, the weight of the past seemed to disappear. Although both had suffered, they had also grown and changed, and now they had the opportunity to start over, this time together. "I want you to know something else," Charles said in a more serious tone. "It's not just that I want to help you emotionally. I'm in a position where I can help you find a new path. I've been thinking about this since I saw you again, and I believe we could work together to create something new, something that gives you purpose and direction." Alicia looked at him with surprise, not knowing exactly what he meant. "What do you mean?" she asked, intrigued. Charles leaned forward, his expression determined. "I want to help you start your own business, Alicia. A place where you can share your love for cooking, where you can create an environment that reflects who you really are. You don't have to work for others who don't appreciate who you are. We can do this together so that you have a place where your values and kindness are truly appreciated." The words of Charles echoed in Alicia's mind like a whisper, and for a moment she didn't know how to respond. The idea of owning her own business, opening a cafe or restaurant where she could cook with love and without the pressures of a hostile environment, was something she had never really considered possible. But now, with Charles offering his support, that possibility began to take shape. "Charles, I don't know what to say," Alicia murmured, feeling both excited and overwhelmed. Charles smiled and took her hand. "You don't have to say anything right now, just think about it. I'm here to help you with whatever you need, and you don't have to make any decisions immediately. What I want you to know is that you're not alone, Alicia. Together we can get through this and you can start again, in the way you've always dreamed." Alicia felt tears welling up again, but this time they were tears of hope, not despair. The idea of having her own place, a place where she could stay true to herself and her grandfather's teachings, was a ray of light in the darkness that had surrounded her. "I'll think about it, Charles," she finally said, with a weak but genuine smile. "And thank you. Thank you for being here, for everything." Charles nodded, a satisfied smile on his face. "You don't have to thank me, Alicia. We'll do this together, as it should have always been." As they left the cafe, Alicia felt that a new chapter in her life was beginning. There were still challenges ahead, and the uncertainty hadn't completely vanished. But with Charles and Thomas by her side, she no longer felt lost. The future, though uncertain, now seemed full of possibilities, and Alicia knew she was ready to face it. As Alicia and Charles began building new hope for the future, elsewhere in the city, someone else was making moves of their own. Don Fernando, the enigmatic customer of the Taste restaurant, watched the events unfold with growing interest. From his place in the shadows, he had witnessed the injustice done to Alicia, and although initially just a distant observer, something inside him had changed when he saw the young waitress's compassion and courage. Don Fernando was not an ordinary man. He had traveled the world, accumulating not only wealth but also a deep understanding of people and their motivations. Over his life, he had learned to value integrity and kindness in a world that often seemed devoid of both. Alicia's decision to help a needy child, despite the possible consequences, had impacted him in a way he hadn't expected. The incident at Taste wasn't the first he had seen in his life, but it was one he couldn't ignore. He decided to use his influence to thoroughly investigate what was happening at the restaurant. What he discovered left him astonished and filled with indignation. For years, Mr. Smith had run Taste with an iron fist, demanding perfection and absolute obedience from his employees. However, behind the facade of luxury and sophistication, there were dishonest and abusive practices that had affected many of his workers. Don Fernando soon learned that Smith had been embezzling tips meant for his staff, amassing a small fortune at the expense of those who worked hard for modest wages. Moreover, Smith had exploited his employees, forcing them to work overtime without pay and threatening them with dismissal if they dared to complain. These practices had created an atmosphere of fear and despair in the restaurant, where employees, including Alicia, lived in constant fear of losing their jobs for the slightest mistake. Armed with this information, Don Fernando decided it was time to act, not just for Alicia, but for everyone who had suffered under Mr. Smith's regime. He knew he couldn't let these injustices continue without consequences. Though his intervention might be seen as meddling in others' affairs, Don Fernando firmly believed in justice and the power of truth. Using his contacts in the industry, Don Fernando began asking discreet questions, seeking out former employees of Taste who would be willing to talk about the restaurant's practices. Although many were initially reluctant to say anything for fear of retaliation, Don Fernando's presence and his promise of legal support began to change things. Little by little, stories of abuse and corruption came to light. One of the first to speak was a former head chef who had been fired for refusing to accept Smith's abusive conditions. His testimony was compelling and provided documentary evidence of the financial irregularities at the restaurant. Other employees, including some who still worked there, joined him, revealing more details about how Smith manipulated the accounts for his personal gain. With each new piece of information, the case against Mr. Smith grew stronger. Determined to expose the truth, Don Fernando contacted a renowned journalist who had worked on several corporate corruption cases. The journalist, intrigued by the story, agreed to investigate and, if enough evidence was found, would publish an article that would put Taste at the center of a media scandal. Meanwhile, at the restaurant, tension was beginning to build. The employees, increasingly aware that something was changing, began to notice that some of their colleagues had been called to mysterious meetings outside of work. Though few knew the details, the rumor that someone was investigating Mr. Smith began to spread. Kate, always alert to any changes in the atmosphere, also noticed the growing nervousness among the staff. Although she had initially enjoyed Alicia's dismissal, she was now beginning to question her own actions. The possibility that Smith's corrupt practices could be exposed filled her with unease. She knew that although she had been complicit in maintaining silence, she too could be implicated if the truth came to light. The mounting pressure finally led Don Fernando to contact Alicia directly. He knew that she, more than anyone, deserved to know what was happening and that, if she wished, she could play a crucial role in unmasking Smith. One afternoon, while Alicia was with Charles and Thomas in their small apartment, she received an unexpected call. At first, she hesitated to answer, but the voice on the other end surprised her. It was Don Fernando, the restaurant customer who had always left notes on napkins, filled with quotes and reflections. "Alicia, this is Don Fernando," the deep but kind voice said. "I've been following what happened at Taste, and I want to talk to you about something very important. I think it's time the world knows the truth." Alicia, surprised and a little bewildered, agreed to meet him. She didn't know what to expect, but something in her intuition told her she should listen to what he had to say. They met at a quiet cafe the next day. Don Fernando, with his usual air of mystery, explained everything he had discovered about Mr. Smith and the corrupt practices at Taste. Alicia listened in astonishment and growing anger as she learned the extent of the injustices that had been committed. "I can't believe all this was happening," Alicia said, her voice trembling with indignation. "I knew something wasn't right, but I never imagined it was this bad." Don Fernando nodded, understanding her shock. That's why we need the truth to come out, Alicia. Not just for you, but for everyone who has been exploited and mistreated. The journalist I'm working with is ready to publish the story, but it would be much more powerful if you, who were one of the most recent victims, were willing to speak publicly. Alicia remained silent, weighing the proposal. Speaking out publicly would mean reliving the humiliation she had suffered, but it would also be an opportunity to seek justice, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been affected. It's not an easy decision, Don Fernando continued, but I believe that if you're willing, your voice could make a difference. Alicia took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision on her shoulders. She knew this was an opportunity to face her fears and fight for what she believed was right. She remembered her grandfather's words about doing the right thing, even when it was difficult. "I'll do it," she finally said with determination in her voice. "I can't let Smith keep doing this. I'm ready to speak out." Don Fernando smiled, satisfied with her decision. "I knew we could count on you, Alicia. Together we'll bring the truth to light and see justice done." The meeting with Don Fernando marked a turning point in Alicia's life. She now had a clear purpose: to confront Smith and expose the corruption that had remained hidden for so long. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but this time she wasn't alone. With Don Fernando and Charles by her side, she was determined to fight for the truth and for a better future. The sun had barely begun to illuminate the city streets when Alicia's phone vibrated on the kitchen table. With her heart pounding, she picked it up with trembling hands. It was a message from Don Fernando. "Today is the day. The article is out in the newsstands. Stay strong." Alicia felt a mix of fear and determination as she read those words. She knew that the publication of the article would change everything, not just for her, but for everyone who had been exploited at Taste. With Charles and Thomas by her side, she tried to calm her breathing. She got up and walked to the corner newsstand to pick up a newspaper. As she opened the front page, her eyes met the headline she had been waiting for. The luxury behind the abuse, the dark practices of an elite restaurant. "We did it," she murmured, feeling a surge of emotions wash over her. She had spoken out, she had fought, and now the truth was there for everyone to see. "Alicia," Charles called from the door, "are you ready for what's coming?" Alicia looked at him, her gaze resolute. "I don't know if I'll ever be completely ready, but I know I'm where I'm meant to be." Charles nodded, his unconditional support reflected in his eyes. Thomas, still too young to fully understand the magnitude of what was happening, walked over to Alicia and offered her a smile that melted her heart. "Is everything okay, Mom?" he asked innocently. Alicia knelt to his level and hugged him tightly. "Yes, honey, everything is going to be okay." Meanwhile, at Taste, the day started like any other, or at least that's what the employees who didn't yet know what was coming thought. Kate, however, noticed something different in the atmosphere. The usual, punctual arrival of customers didn't happen. The tables, which would normally be booked days in advance, remained empty. Something was wrong. At that moment, one of the cooks, with a panicked expression, burst into the staff room holding a crumpled newspaper in his hand. "Kate," he exclaimed, his voice trembling, "you need to see this." Kate took the newspaper, her heart racing as she read the article. Every line revealed more of the horror that had been hidden behind Taste's doors. The corruption, the abuse, the dishonest practices. And Alicia's name, brave in giving her testimony, stood out in bold. "This can't be," Kate whispered, feeling guilt start to consume her. Her mind filled with images from the past, of times when she had turned a blind eye to the injustices, of how she had been part of a rotten system. Suddenly the restaurant's door slammed open and Mr. Smith entered, his face red with fury. In his hand, he held a copy of the same newspaper. "Everyone to the dining room now," he ordered in a thunderous voice. The employees, fearful and confused, quickly gathered. Kate felt the fear gripping her, but she couldn't take her eyes off the newspaper Smith was holding. She knew this would be a decisive moment. "Who was it?" Smith shouted, looking at everyone with eyes full of rage. "Who dared to betray this restaurant?" No one dared to speak. The silence was thick, almost unbearable. Kate felt a lump in her throat, but she couldn't utter a word. The employees exchanged glances, reflecting fear, confusion, and a growing sense of liberation. "Alicia," one of the waiters murmured. Was it her? Smith turned sharply, his glaring eyes landing on the young waiter who had spoken. Of course it was her, he spat. That girl was always a problem, and now look what she's done. Kate couldn't take it anymore. She knew it wasn't fair to put all the blame on Alicia. She had also been complicit by staying silent, and that complicity was consuming her. Finally, taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. It was me, Mr. Smith, she said with a trembling but determined voice. I was the one who spoke to the authorities. Smith froze. His eyes widened as the rest of the employees looked at her in disbelief. What did you say? Smith asked, unable to believe what he was hearing. I couldn't stay silent any longer, Kate continued, this time with more firmness. Not after seeing how you treated Alicia and so many others. I was wrong to stay silent for so long, but I couldn't keep being part of this. Smith took a step towards her, his hands trembling with rage. Traitor, ingrate, he spat, approaching menacingly. Before he could do anything else, the restaurant's doors burst open. A group of labor inspectors entered, accompanied by police officers and a couple of journalists who already had their cameras ready. The atmosphere, already tense, became even more chaotic. Mr. Smith, we're here for an inspection, one of the inspectors said with authority. We have evidence of multiple labor law violations, and we're here to verify the facts. Smith tried to maintain his composure, but it was clear that the situation was slipping out of his control. This is a farce, he shouted, trying to impose his authority. You have no right to be here. We have all the necessary warrants, Mr. Smith, one of the police officers responded, showing an official document. Now, please cooperate. The employees remained silent, watching as the restaurant that had been their workplace became the center of a scandal. The inspectors began reviewing the accounting books, while the journalists took pictures and recorded every moment. Smith, defeated and furious, had no choice but to watch as everything he had built crumbled before his eyes. Kate, seeing the scene, felt a mix of relief and remorse. She had stepped forward to face the truth, but she knew she still had much to redeem. However, this was just the beginning of her path to reconciliation with herself. In the midst of the chaos, one of the inspectors approached Smith and, in a firm voice, said, Mr. Smith, you are under investigation for fraud and labor law violations. We ask that you accompany us to the station for a formal statement. Smith, with no other option, was escorted by the police, his face a mixture of disbelief and contained fury. As they led him out of the restaurant, the group of journalists followed, capturing every moment. Taste had fallen, and with it, its ruthless owner. When it was all over, the employees remained silent, trying to process what had just happened. Kate, feeling that she had finally done the right thing, left the restaurant, looking for a quiet place to reflect. Alicia, meanwhile, was at home following the news that wouldn't stop talking about the taste scandal. She knew her life had changed forever, but she also knew she had done the right thing. With the support of Charles and Thomas, she prepared for whatever came next. She knew the battle had been tough, but justice had finally prevailed. Days later, the echo of the scandal was still resonating throughout the city. Taste, once a symbol of luxury and exclusivity, had become a place of shame and disgrace. The restaurant remained closed, with yellow crime scene tape surrounding the entrance, and the few employees who still approached only did so to collect their belongings and seek new opportunities. Alicia, now far from the chaos, was beginning to think about what would come next. With the support of Charles and Don Fernando, she had started to dream of her own cafe, a place where she could share her love for cooking and the values her grandfather had instilled in her. However, the scars of the past were still fresh, and although she had won an important battle, the feeling of uncertainty remained. One night, as Alicia was resting in her apartment, an unexpected call pulled her from her thoughts. It was Kate. Since the scandal broke, they hadn't spoken, and Alicia wasn't sure what to expect. "Alicia, it's Kate," the voice on the other end said, with a tone more humble than Alicia had ever heard before. "I need to see you. There's something important we need to talk about." Alicia hesitated for a moment. Their relationship had been, at best, tense, but something in Kate's voice told her that this time was different. "Okay, Kate," Alicia responded, keeping her tone neutral. "Where would you like to meet?" "We could meet at the park near Taste. It won't take long." Alicia agreed, though with some reluctance. Something inside her told her this meeting would be different from the others. She put on her coat and stepped out into the cold night. When she arrived at the park, she saw Kate sitting on a bench staring at the ground. She seemed smaller, more fragile than Alicia remembered. As Alicia approached, Kate looked up and greeted her with a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thanks for coming, Alicia," Kate began, her voice soft, almost trembling. "I know that after everything that's happened, I'm probably the last person you want to talk to, but there's something you need to know." Alicia nodded, sitting next to her. The air was thick with palpable tension. "Kate, I know things haven't been easy for either of us," Alicia said, trying to break the ice. "But if there's something you need to tell me, I'm here to listen." Kate sighed, looking into the distance before speaking again. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened, how I acted, how I treated you. I can't keep living with this guilt. I was always ambitious, always wanted to climb the social ladder, no matter who I stepped on along the way. But after everything that's come to light, I can't help but feel like I've been doing it all wrong." Alicia remained silent, letting her continue. "I know I was cruel to you," Kate admitted, her voice breaking. "I wanted to make you look bad, to make you stumble so I could move ahead. But what I didn't understand was that my success didn't have to mean your failure. I let ambition consume me, and now, seeing all that I've lost, I realize it wasn't worth it." Alicia felt a mix of emotions. Hearing Kate admit her mistakes was something she never expected, but she also knew this moment was important for both of them. "Kate, I can't say it was easy enduring what you did," Alicia said honestly, "but I also understand that taste put us in a situation where it was hard not to fall into those traps. We were all fighting to survive in a toxic environment. I'm glad you realize what happened, but I want you to know that I don't hold a grudge. I want to move forward, and I hope you can too." Kate nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude and regret. "Thank you, Alicia. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I appreciate it. There's something else I need to tell you. Something that might affect you, and I wanted to warn you before it's too late." Alicia frowned, her curiosity piqued. "What is it?" Kate hesitated, her gaze dropping to the ground again before continuing. "I've been hearing rumors that Smith doesn't plan to let this go. Despite everything that's happened, he's looking for a way to get revenge. I don't know exactly what he has planned, but I've heard he still has allies who haven't been exposed. People who might be willing to help him do something that could hurt you." A chill ran down Alicia's spine. "Are you saying he might try something against me?" Kate nodded slowly. "I'm not sure of the details, but I wanted you to know. Don't trust anyone from his circle. Smith is desperate, and a desperate man can do terrible things." Alicia nodded, grateful for the warning, though she couldn't help but feel uneasy. She knew Smith was a dangerous man, but she hadn't anticipated that he might go so far. "Thanks for telling me, Kate. I'll keep it in mind." Kate sighed, relieved. "I just want you to be safe, Alicia. If anything happens to Smith, or if I hear anything else, I'll let you know." They said their goodbyes, and Alicia stayed in the park for a moment, reflecting on what Kate had told her. The threat of Smith still loomed over her, but she also knew she couldn't let fear paralyze her. That night, as she slept, Alicia was awakened by a distant but alarming sound. It was a sound she knew all too well, the crackling of flames. She jumped out of bed, ran to the window, and from her apartment she saw the sky lit up by an orange glow. Her heart sank as she realized what she was seeing. Taste was on fire. "Charles!" she shouted, waking him up. "The restaurant is on fire!" Charles quickly got up, running to the window beside Alicia. They both watched in silence, horrified, as the flames devoured what was left of Taste. The fire crackled with an unstoppable fury, while black smoke rose into the sky. "Do you think it was Smith?" Alicia asked, her voice trembling. Charles held her, trying to comfort her. "I don't know, but whoever it was, justice will find the truth." At that moment, Alicia's phone rang. It was Don Fernando. "Alicia, I just heard about the fire," he said, his voice grave. "I'm on my way. Don't worry, we'll make sure this doesn't go unpunished." Alicia nodded, grateful for Don Fernando's support, but the fear still lingered in her heart. Taste had been destroyed, But she knew this fire was more than just a coincidence. It was a message, a warning that Smith or his allies wouldn't give up easily. As the sound of fire sirens echoed in the distance, Alicia promised herself that she wouldn't let fear defeat her. The fire at Taste was a reminder of the darkness that still existed, but it was also a sign that the past needed to be completely destroyed to make way for a new beginning. The battle wasn't over yet, but Alicia was ready to face whatever came next. With Charles, Thomas, and Don Fernando by her side, she knew she could overcome any obstacle. Taste was just a building, but her fighting spirit was unbreakable, and she wouldn't let the darkness consume her. The fire at Taste had left deep scars on the city and in Alicia's heart. However, it had also given her the opportunity to be reborn, to leave the past behind, and build a future on her own terms. The fear she had felt after the fire transformed into unwavering determination. She knew she couldn't stay stuck in what had happened. She had to move forward. A few days after the fire, while Alicia was sorting through her thoughts in the small apartment she shared with Charles and Thomas, Charles approached her with a serious but loving expression. "Alicia, I've been thinking a lot about what happened and what comes next," he said, sitting next to her on the couch. "I know everything that happened at Taste was terrible, but I also think it's an opportunity to start something new, something of your own." Alicia looked at him, feeling a warm relief knowing that Charles was by her side in this process. "What do you mean, Charles?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. Charles took her hands in his, a gesture that filled her with security and confidence. "Since we reconnected, I've seen how strong and capable you are. You've been through so much, but you've always pushed forward. And I think it's time you use that strength to build something of your own. I think it's time to start that idea I mentioned when we reconnected." Alicia felt her heart skip a beat. It was a dream she had kept secret for so long, and now Charles was offering her the chance to make it a reality. "Charles, I don't know what to say," she murmured, moved. "It's a dream I've always had, but I never thought I could do it." Charles smiled with that warmth that always managed to calm any doubt in her heart. "You don't have to do it alone, Alicia. I'm here to support you every step of the way. We have the resources, and more importantly, we have the determination. I know we can make it happen together." Alicia felt a surge of emotion and gratitude. Charles had been by her side from the beginning, offering her not just his love but also his unwavering support. Knowing that he believed in her enough to propose this project together gave her the confidence she needed. "Thank you, Charles, really. Thank you for believing in me. Let's do it. Let's build that cafe together." With the decision made, the following days were filled with planning and hard work. Charles and Alicia dedicated themselves to finding the perfect place, scouring the city for a location that could become their new home. Finally, they found a small building on the corner of a quiet street, with large windows that let in the sunlight. Although it needed some renovations, Alicia saw the potential immediately. "This is the place, Charles," Alicia said, looking at the building with hopeful eyes. "I can see it. I can see what we can do here." Charles nodded, sharing her enthusiasm. "Then this will be our place. This is where we'll start over." The renovations began right away. Charles and Alicia worked side by side, overseeing every detail to ensure that the cafe reflected the warmth and authenticity that Alicia had always dreamed of. They decided to name it La Esquina de Alfred, in honor of Alicia's grandfather, whose memory and teachings had been a constant guide in her life. The day of the grand opening was fast approaching. Alicia, though nervous, felt an unparalleled excitement. All the hard work, all the sacrifices were about to pay off. Charles was by her side every step of the way, reminding her that she wasn't alone in this new adventure. Finally, the day arrived. La Esquina de Alfred opened its doors, and Alicia was surprised to see how many people had come to support her new venture. The cafe quickly filled with curious customers and friends who wanted to congratulate her on this new chapter in her life. Charles, holding Thomas's hand, approached Alicia as she busied herself with the customers. "I'm so proud of you, Alicia," he said, with a smile that reflected his love and admiration. "Everything you've been through has brought you here, and I can't wait to see everything you'll achieve." Alicia felt her eyes fill with tears, but this time they were tears of happiness. She had fought so hard to get to this point, and now with her cafe full of life and laughter, she knew that every sacrifice had been worth it. "I couldn't have done it without you, Charles," she replied, squeezing his hand. "This place isn't just mine, it's ours, and I'm so happy to share it with you and Thomas." Thomas, always full of energy, ran around the cafe admiring everything his mother had created. "Mom, this is amazing," he exclaimed, his eyes shining with excitement. "It's the best cafe in the world." Alicia laughed, feeling a warmth that filled her completely. This was her home, her refuge, and the place where her family could grow and thrive. As the afternoon progressed, Alicia took a moment to look around. La Esquina de Alfred was a dream come true, a symbol of everything she had overcome and everything that was yet to come. With Charles and Thomas by her side, she knew she was ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. The sun began to set, filling the cafe with a golden, warm light. Alicia knew this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one full of hope, love, and new opportunities. And with her family by her side, she was more than ready to write the story of her life, a story of resilience, redemption, and new beginnings. 6 months later, the morning sun gently filtered through the windows of La Esquina de Alfred, filling the space with warm, welcoming light. Alicia was behind the counter, making the first coffee of the day. It was early, and although the cafe was still empty, she felt a sense of inner peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. As she waited for the coffee to finish brewing, Alicia took a moment to reflect on everything that had happened in the past few months. The path that had led her here had been full of challenges, but each one had been a lesson, a piece of the puzzle that now fit perfectly into her life. She remembered the days at Taste, a place that had meant so much to her at the time. She had started there full of hope, but soon discovered the shadows that lurked behind the facade of luxury. The toxic environment, the rivalries, and above all the injustice she had suffered for staying true to her principles had tested her spirit in ways she never imagined. However, what she remembered most wasn't the pain or the hardships, but the decisions she made in the midst of it all. The decision to help a child in need, despite the consequences. The decision not to let fear defeat her when she was unjustly fired. And finally, the decision to trust Charles and herself to build something new, something better. Alicia smiled at the thought of Charles, who at that moment entered the cafe, holding Thomas's hand. Both of them radiated joy, and seeing them, Alicia felt a wave of gratitude. Charles had been her rock, her unwavering support, and together they had overcome obstacles that seemed insurmountable. "Good morning, love," Charles said, approaching to give her a kiss on the cheek. "How do you feel today?" Alicia returned his smile, feeling that words weren't enough to express what she felt. "I feel incredibly lucky," she replied. "Everything we've been through, it's all brought us here, and I couldn't be happier." Thomas, with his usual energy, ran to the counter and climbed onto a chair. "Mom, today I want to help you with the pastries," he said, his eyes full of excitement. Alicia laughed, nodding enthusiastically. "Of course, little chef, let's make today a great day." As they began to prepare the kitchen, Alicia thought about all the people who had been part of her journey. Kate, who finally found her way to redemption. Don Fernando, whose support was crucial in the darkest moments. And every one of the employees from Taste who, like her, had found a way to move on after the fall of the restaurant. Each of them had played a role in her story, and although the path had been difficult, Alicia knew she wouldn't change anything that had happened. Every challenge had made her stronger, more determined, and more aware of what truly mattered in life. As she continued to reflect, the first customer of the day entered the cafe. It was an elderly woman, with a kind smile that lit up her face. Alicia greeted her with her usual warmth, feeling that this simple act of serving coffee was more meaningful than she had ever imagined. "Welcome to La Esquina de Alfred," she said, as she served a steaming cup. "How can I help you today?" The woman accepted the cup with gratitude, looking around with a satisfied expression. "This place is wonderful, dear," she said. "There's something about the atmosphere that just makes you feel at home." Alicia felt a lump in her throat hearing those words. That was exactly what she had wanted to create. A home, a refuge, not just for her and her family, but for everyone who walked through that door. "Thank you," she replied sincerely. "That's the best compliment I could receive." The woman nodded and went to a nearby table, leaving Alicia with a sense of fulfillment that filled her heart. The cafe quickly filled up, and Alicia found herself immersed in the bustle of the morning, serving coffee, attending to customers, and making sure everything ran smoothly. But as she worked, one thought kept resonating in her mind. Sometimes life takes us down paths we never would have chosen, through storms that test us in ways we didn't think possible. But it's in those moments, when everything seems lost, that we discover who we really are. Alicia had learned that true strength doesn't lie in avoiding challenges, but in facing them with integrity and love, in staying true to what you believe, even when the world seems to be against you. Every loss, every obstacle had been a lesson, an opportunity to grow. And now, seeing what she had achieved, she knew it had all been worth it. Her life, which had been marked by tragedy and injustice, was now full of love, hope, and purpose. The past couldn't be changed, but Alicia had learned to embrace her scars as part of her story, as reminders of what she had overcome and the strong, resilient woman she had become. As the afternoon began to fade, and the cafe remained full of laughter and lively conversations, Alicia looked around with a deep sense of peace. Alfred's Place was more than just a cafe. It was a symbol of everything she had achieved, of everything she had overcome, and of everything that was still to come. The future remained uncertain, but Alicia knew that with Charles, Thomas, and her new extended family by her side, she was ready for whatever came next. Because now she understood that no matter what the future held, she would always find a way to move forward, with the same courage and determination that had brought her here. And so, with a smile on her face and her heart full of gratitude, Alicia closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to enjoy the simple yet powerful truth she had discovered. Life is a journey, and although it's hard sometimes, there's always beauty along the way, especially when we travel it with love and hope. With this reflection in mind, Alicia opened her eyes, ready to keep moving forward, to keep building, to keep loving. Because she knew that, in the end, that's what really matters. And that's all for today. Thank you for joining me on this adventure. If you liked the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content. See you in the next one. Take care, and always remember to follow your dreams. See you soon.